I'm going to introduce you now to Siobhan McQuaid, who is actually the founder of Horizon NUA and director of the company, to moderate the next panel discussion. Siobhan is also one of the foremost researchers on nature-based entrepreneurship with Trinity College Dublin, and is the PI, Principal Investigator of the Go Nature Positive project. So we're really pleased, given her busy timetable, that she can join us today and is going to take on and moderate the discussion now with the panelists. Handing over to you, Siobhan.
Thanks for the introduction, Isabel, and thank you for everybody for joining us with their equally busy timetables, no doubt. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into this panel because I think we've had some really inspiring examples, as you mentioned at the beginning from Brian, about how we can secure impact investment in these high growth companies that are both good for investors and good for nature restoration and the environment. And then we've also heard in the last panel about the kind of the challenges that other types of nature restoration projects can find in nature-based solutions in an urban scale. So this panel, I think, is super timely given the start of COP30 this week. And we know that, you know, financing and climate financing is high in the agenda. But unfortunately, we also know that nature financing makes up only a very small part of overall climate financing, and that we face a gap of like $700 billion in financing every year to reach the goals of the Global Biodiversity Framework for full nature restoration by 2050. So what can we do about it? This is one of the reasons why we're having this panel today, is because one of the challenges that is often cited, and we just heard it in the last panel, is that it's difficult to fund nature, and that 80% of nature financing comes from the public sector, and we need more private sector financing. How do we get that? Well, we thought we'd bring along some investors and some financial institutions, and we'd ask them today to share their perspectives on what are the opportunities and what are the challenges, and you know, how can we support more projects and more businesses and more nature-based solutions projects that contribute both returns for the company, the employees, the investors, the communities, and most importantly, for nature. How can we do that? So we know also that these projects come in all different shapes and sizes. And I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat there, and I can see that there's that recognition that sometimes nature projects only need 50,000 euros and some need millions, 50 million euros. So on our panel, what we've tried to do, and we haven't addressed all scales and all gaps, it's impossible, but we have tried to address a number of different scales and types of investment. So I'm delighted to introduce you to our panel. So first of all, we have Kieran Ford, who's the Business Development Manager from Wilderway, who are working on high integrity carbon nature credit projects. Then we have Zoe Pedden, who's a partner in Ananda Impact Ventures. We have Thomas van Kranen, who's the managing director from Tredes Bank in Belgium. We have Thomas Gemeiner, who's the chief venture office for Brainforest, a nature accelerator based in Switzerland. And then there's me. Hopefully I'll be doing very little talking and a lot of listening. But as we're tight on time, I'm going to start the panel by maybe asking each of our speakers to tell us briefly about what type of nature project that they invest in. And because we want to focus on examples, we've asked each of them to give us one example of a project that they've invested in and to talk about the outcomes from this project for both investors and for nature. So we might start with you, Kieran. Would you like to start off and maybe introduce a little bit about the type of nature project that you're investing in, and maybe give us a concrete example? Nina, do you want to share a slide for Kieran?
Thanks very much, Siobhan. And thanks to you and to Nina and for Isabel for putting on such a great event, I suppose, first off. So yeah, my name is Kieran Ford. I'm one of the business development managers with with Wilder Way. Wilder Way is a nature-based carbon and nature credit development company. So basically we use carbon and nature credits as a means of scaling up nature restoration and rewilding projects around Europe. So that's the how we do it, or how we support investment. The kind of why is basically fundamentally we believe that nature is the foundation of a healthy economy and society, and it's not enough, I suppose, to be protecting the nature and biodiversity that we have left. We need to be restoring what we've lost. So a specific example of a project that we're working on is what you see here. So it's a project with our great partners in Portugal, Rewilding Portugal. It's a nature credit project using Vera's nature framework as the standard. And what it involves basically is what Rewilding Portugal are doing is they're reintroducing 2 keystone herbivore species back into the landscape. So you can see one of those herbivore species there. They're Soraya horses, which are a local breed of horse, and the other herbivore species are toros. So they're a kind of a breed of cattle that mimic the behavior basically of a species of bovine called an auroch that went extinct, I think, in the 17th century. So in terms of the kind of benefits for nature by reintroducing these herbivore species, you increase the biodiversity in these landscapes. So the herbivores get in there and they do all of the trampling and the grazing and the messing about that they do, and it creates all of these little niches for other species then to come in and take advantage of. In terms of the benefits for investors, so by investing in this project or purchasing a nature credit, I suppose at a high level you're supporting nature restoration if you're interested as an investor in doing that, but maybe more tangibly, I suppose, if you're a business that's operating in Portugal or near or within this landscape, wildfire risk is a real risk, or maybe a real risk to your business or to your supply chain. And one of the outcomes of reintroducing these herbivore species onto the landscape is that they can help reduce that risk. So basically, one of the reasons for wildfire risks in this area is a lack of grazing, or grazing animals due to kind of land abandonment. And by reintroducing these species, they'll get in, they'll graze, and they'll reduce, I suppose, some of the fuel for these wildfires, basically. So I think that's about it from the Portugal project.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting example. And I think nature credits, I think Brian picked up at the topic at the beginning, is an emerging area of interest. A lot to be done there and a lot of different perspectives on it. We might move to you, Thomas, next, because I know staying with this area of, credits, I think there's a lot of experience in biodiversity net gain in the UK, and this is the example that you've chosen to present today. But we might start by asking really what, from a bank perspective, a financial institution, where are you coming from in terms of the how and why you invest in nature, and why this is a good example?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Siobhan. Yeah, so for those who don't know, Triodos Bank, it's originated in the Netherlands, is the leading sustainable bank in Europe. And basically we have been set up more than 40 years ago by a couple of people who wanted the bank to serve society instead of the other way around, and to contribute to quality of life. And that means that we're interested in anything going from the environment to, of course, biodiversity, to social well-being and culture. And this is why this whole journey of more than 40 years led us in November 2024 to commit to investing, lending, and donating a total of 500 million euros to nature-based solutions by 2030. It's a very natural thing for Triodos Bank to do, because we understand the interrelationships between the environment, well-being, and culture. So all of the challenges we're facing are interconnected, and especially having a focus towards restoring nature is extremely important. You have mentioned 700 billion a year. We all know that this is not going to come. This is not coming full stop today, but it's not going to come only from governments and the public sector. So we need private money going into that. And I brought this example indeed based on the biodiversity net gain policy of the UK. And I don't know if you want me to explain a little bit what this project is about.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this is it's an example of perhaps of blended financing, and how policy,
Absolutely.
a mixture of how policy can be used very effectively to incentivize public and private investment.
Yeah.
So maybe just explain a little bit how it works.
Yeah, so indeed, it's an example of a blended structure, because basically, when we finance a project, obviously we're looking at how much value is being created. Values are being created. It's not only financial value, but different types of values. But it's also important to see if cash flow can be created, because at the end of the day, cash flow we repay loans or equity by private investors. And so in this case, a project, you see the details on your screen here, but it's a project to create woodlands. But it's not only about planting trees, it's also about reversing biodiversity loss, restoring an ecosystem with several habitats, also involving the local community. And so next to public foundation funding, there has been also a loan from Triodos Bank that has a source of repayment the income from stemming from the biodiversity net gain, some subsidies, future ecotourism, as it says here. So let's say a layered structure of and sources of repayments to pay back the loan.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And I think that answers the question from Meta in the chat there about what's in it for a bank, which is the capacity to generate value and cash flow and returns on investment as well.
Can I maybe
Yeah.
give a little bit of flavor to that? I think what we should understand also is that the bank has a responsibility towards the savers that entrust the money to them. So actually, it is very important for a bank, when there is a request to extend the loan, that there is sufficient cash flow to repay the loan. So it's really inherent to the business model, and that's why in our commitment of 500 million, we also included venture capital, catalytic capital, and also donations, because for different types of projects in different, let's say, maturity phases, different sources of funding are needed to realize these projects.
Thank you, Thomas. And that's a very nice segue, I think, into I might invite Zoe to present your perspective next, because indeed, I know this creation of value, cash flow, return and investment is very important to your model as well. So maybe if you could talk to us a little bit about, the types of project and scale of projects you invest in, and and some of these examples here would be really interesting.
Yeah, sure. So we're an impact VC. So we have a fund that's 100 million in size that we've raised from institutions, but also lots of ultra high net worth and family offices. And we invest across climate, nature and healthcare and tech bio. So lots of scientists and engineers, those kind of companies, rather than projects that we have often quite a a scientific IP spin out from a PhD or something like that are the kinds of companies that we look to invest in at the pre-seed to late seed stage. So to give an example, to bring this to life, so Ocean Ledger, they've got an Earth observation technology that looks at measuring bathymetry to 30 meters below the surface and in the ocean around coastal regions. So they could they work with insurance companies on parametric insurance to get more accurate predictions of coastal properties and the erosion and the timings around that. So they have a very commercial angle, but also they're shifting money into natural solutions around the coast, whether it's mangroves, whether it's seagrass or corals, to act as a natural barrier. So really important in the value chain for the coastal area. And then sticking on to Earth observation, just moving across there, you've got Aurora Tech. So they have currently 17 nanosatellites in lower orbit, and soon they'll have 100. So they'll be able to every minute of the day being able to detect with thermal intelligence wildfire. And so people can get to them before they happen, so, looking at nature and saving lives as well. So really, really important to be able to see where something is spreading and get people out there really quickly, which hasn't been able to be done before. And Aurora Tech so far have raised over 40 million. And they have the national framework contracts for Greece and Canada, and I think there's one more in the works too. So that's quite a late stage one that we backed from an early beginning when it was just satellites on a table and nothing was up in space. And then down the bottom, you've got Nature Metrics, another one that's gone quite big too. They've raised over 40 million at this point. But when we invested, they were a lab using environmental DNA to be able to detect species. So providing a 10x lower cost solution than the environmental consultants staying on site, identifying single species. They were able to identify thousands of species quite simply. And that meant that over the 6 years from the founder's PhD and onwards, that they were able to collect one of the largest databases on the planet of environmental DNA and what's everywhere around the world. So they started to build, when we invested, software on the top of that can then start to measure the changes in nature, ground truthing with environmental DNA, also using satellite data. So they're testing in the water, the soil and the air, and at canopy level now as well, in addition to the satellites. And that therefore can then identify risks across multinationals' assets, but also become the data behind nature loans, nature bonds. So it's got a finance, the long-term outcome is accurate financing to make, the world a more nature positive place. And then finally, we have Klim working in regenerative farming. So they provide software and support for farmers, mostly across Germany at the moment, but recently launched in the UK, to give them the knowledge and the support to move to regenerative farming, but also the access to the financing in terms of carbon credits, and also to go to market, and the people who buy their regenerative farmed products, the commercial side will have a stamp to so that supply chain can tell that they've come from a regenerative farming source. So it's like stimulating a whole value chain there in ag going towards food. So those are the kind of things that we invest in.
That's fantastic, Zoe. Just to kind of, before we introduce Thomas Gemeiner, then just to give an idea of the scale of investment. So what's the entry level in terms of investment, and what kind of time frame are you looking for a return on investment and levels? Just again, so that we can kind of compare the different types of financing, and
Yeah,
very specific, I suppose, about like an impact VC. You're looking for something quite specific, right?
Yeah, so it has to have the scalability for an exit in around a decade of between 500 million to $1 billion plus. So
Wow.
these are your IPO type companies, you know, the big future, you know, knock Google off its shelf, knock all Elon Musk's ones off the shelf, that kind of thing. So they really are. I'm fully aware, as a former founder myself, that worked on a much smaller company that still had tremendous impact, that we only appeal and are appropriate for a very, very small percentage. It's like 0.5% of all businesses. So within nature, you know, it's very much a microcosm, but I think it's an important one because they act as the front leaders. They open the gates for more kinds of financing. They capture people's imagination and they can influence policy at a high level too because of the influence that they have, these companies. So the size that I invest in is so from 500,000 to 3 million initial ticket. But the round sizes tend to be between, we're part of like 2 million to 8 million in size.
Okay.
And that would be like your pre-seed, seeds and late seeds.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying that, Zoe. And as you said, it's super important that people can see that it might be a very small percentage, but there are businesses that have this potential for other impact investors to see the potential for these nature type businesses. So last but very not least, in terms of presenting what you do and the type of investment, Thomas, so you're also investing in businesses, but at a different scale than Zoe. So
Yes.
maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what you do and the kind of type and scale of investment. And I love this example.
Sure. Happy to do so. I think Brainforest is a bit of a different type of microcosmos, to take over the word from Zoe. We're a bit in the intersection between the NGO world, the philanthropic side, and then also like the private capital and maybe leaning towards VC. And we are like somewhere in the middle. Brainforest is an association based in Switzerland. We are completely powered by philanthropy right now. We have a few Swiss foundations that back us, that make our work possible. And from our own budget, we then also invest in startups, in for-profit, for impact startups. We run an acceleration program twice a year. We work with 5 to 10 startups each, and then invest in like roughly 2 to 3 at the end. And we also try to be catalytic and syndicate additional capital together, so private capital. And the rounds are typically smaller because it's earlier. So we invest between 100 and 150,000 US dollars and then pool in additional few hundred. So normally our pre-seed rounds are somewhere between 300 and 1.5 million. We act globally, which also makes our work quite diverse. We have currently 8 companies in our portfolio, from Suriname, Brazil to Europe to Kenya. And Biotara is one of them. Actually, one of the first ones that we initially co-founded in a bit of a different setup, in kind of a venture studio model that we run initially, and now we are more an accelerator. And Biotara is a very cool example, as they are active in Suriname and Brazil, and they work with communities, native communities. And their mission is to make standing forests more valuable than dead forests. So really creating an alternative to cutting down the trees or going into illegal activities like gold mining, which is oftentimes really an option for those people there. If you really have to think about how to provide for your family, you like think about, okay, but what can you do? So what they are doing, they help to set up factories, and those are not like high-tech factories or anything. It's quite low-tech, really local factories in those community, and then help those people to harvest local nuts in a sustainable way. So for example, Brazil nuts, to then create extracts, wild oils or butters, and then further on create the market access. So kind of help them to create the product and to create the supply chain, and then also access the right markets. And for that example, those are then cosmetic companies. So Biotara achieved to get a pilot with Colgate Palmolive, where they explore how they can integrate some of the products into also existing products to replace some of the ingredients. So really sustainable and also traceable where those products are coming from. And the majority, so currently the model is that 75% of the revenue is really staying with the community. So the majority of the value is really staying locally, which is like very, very important. And they work with 3 communities currently, and once that model is proven, that can obviously be replicated in kind of a partnership model. And they're also raising currently a round of like 500K, and 250 is committed so far in their seed round.
Great. So if anybody out there has another 250K, this sounds like an excellent project to invest in.
Exactly.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone, for introducing these, like, again, great examples of the opportunities for investment in nature, both for investors and for nature to benefit. I suppose the question then is, why are we not seeing more of this? What are, for you, from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that you face in increasing investment in nature? Yeah, so what's the biggest challenge you come across, and what can we do to kind of unlock more investment, more private sector investment? I might start off with Thomas van Creen on this one. Is that okay?
Yeah, and I would like to respond also to a comment of Cindy, who is asking what about the damages caused by banks as a source of maybe cash flow to fund these projects. And really, I think there is capital available, actually quite a lot, and we collectively need to work to a more supportive environment, a facilitating environment, and that means that we need the regulation and tools from let's say more public bodies to help us realize this. So, for example, the biodiversity net gain is a scheme that doesn't exist in many countries. The EU is working on a similar initiative. We have de-risking schemes from, for example, the EIB that is helpful. We have examples, for example, like the Fonds Barnier in France that could be interesting to set up. So there are examples in all the countries in Europe that could be scaled and then copied in other jurisdictions. And then internally, what one can do is get connected to the network and the potential partners in the different geographies, and also start by reviewing the risk appetite and to see if the internal policies are actually helpful. One of the decisions that we have made is in order to enable the 500 million euros is we have opened up or extended the maximum tenor of loans to 30 years because we recognize that for this type of projects the typical 5 to 10 years is much too short, at least in terms of lending. I'm talking about lending, not about equity. So yeah, some ideas here.
That's great, Thomas. And you touched on policy there. I know that there's a little bit of mixed signals coming at the moment, both from policymakers, but also from business and financial institutions. And Zoe, I know this is something that you touched on, you feel quite strongly about. On one hand, we have businesses saying there's too much regulation, and, you know, on the other hand, we have, investors saying we need more. So could you maybe shed a little bit of light on, from an investment perspective, what would your ask from policymakers be? How to encourage and unlock more investment from the private sector?
I sit on the boards of all these companies, so I see their market strategies and their sales and things that when we invest we had assumed would happen with regulation, and without just nearly every single one, the regulation gets put back, it gets watered down. It really takes out the steam, like it really deflates the startup from being able to grow at the pace that they need to do when they take equity financing, puts them at a real disadvantage. So I would like them to stick to their promises. I know it's easier said than done. And also, which is a bit more radical, but it's not unusual to ask, for impact-based accounting. So you've looked at nature-based accounting as an impact investor. When we're putting together, on a profit and loss, to be able to take in the impact that you're having. And so shareholder value takes on an entirely different sense in that word, that it's not just about the growth of GDP as a country that we look at, but we also factor in the positive things that we're actually doing to the planet and to the people as well, and that should be taken into account somehow. That's kind of we've got a lot to do to get everyone aligned on that one, but you can ask.
We can. So I think there's lots of suggestions coming there between Thomas and yourself. Thomas Van Kraan, what about Thomas Kemeimer and Kieran? Outside of policy and regulation, are there any other challenges that could be addressed either through policy or other challenges that are really blocking your more investment?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's the matchmaking of the right capital stack to the investment, right? Which we also discuss a lot. I think we are a nice group of representatives from very different areas and different type of capital that is also there. And beyond that is also like an expectation of return, etc. And like finding the right project for the right person and the right investor, I think is oftentimes really a challenge, especially in the space of nature where the durations are much longer, time to exit is longer, probability of exit lower, etc. Right? So one example, what we do with the blended approach, kind of de-risking, that's I think one mechanism that can help to kind of change the risk profile and the investment perspective. And then what we also do is kind of making deals more accessible in a way as we have like an investment syndicate. It's also, again, for like one niche of this whole area, of course, but kind of enable also private investors to pool in smaller tickets to kickstart some of those projects. And we completely digitalize this process and kind of give access to our due diligence as the investors kind of can jump in the moment we decide after our venture program to invest.
Oh, fantastic. Kieran, the last word on this from you.
Yeah, maybe two challenges, I suppose, maybe, and one of them relates to a lot of the stuff Zoe talked about earlier. So, when it comes to nature credits or measuring, improvements or positive impacts on nature, you're looking for the balance between kind of verifiable data-driven results and how difficult or onerous that might be on partner organizations to collect that. So tools like environmental DNA from nature metrics or satellite imagery or LiDAR, a lot of these technologies are developing and coming down the tracks, and they're going to be very useful, and most of them now as well are kind of leveraging the advances in AI and stuff. So yeah, that challenge, I suppose, of demonstrating that impact is one thing. Another thing, maybe from our perspective, is a lot of businesses or organizations might come to us and say we want to support nature, but they mightn't know exactly how, or they mightn't know the exact reasons why. So I think for any businesses that want to get involved in this, it's to kind of look inwards and really dig down and understand, how or why you want to support nature and what exactly it is that you wanted to do. So that might be a supply chain, risk. It might be, to promote good practices and all of this kind of stuff. But and things like for TNFD and CSRD, I suppose they require, if businesses are aligning with these, they're required to do that kind of looking inward, I would say.
Interesting. Okay, so be clear on motivations, and then I think this technology aspect for the monitoring, reporting and verification, it's both a challenge but also an important opportunity, as we saw from many of the types of projects in your portfolio, Zoe. Isabel is telling me, it's waving mildly.
Time to wrap up.
We have to wrap up because I know there's lots of questions coming through, so we want to leave time for those. So I would have liked to, we could have spent a lot more time on this panel alone, but I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And I'm going to hand back to Isabel maybe to take some of the questions.
Sure. Thanks, Siobhan, and thanks everybody. You're dead right, Siobhan. This conversation I think could have gone on for ages yet, but we have some interesting questions in the chat. I don't know that we'll be able to get to them all, but we'll see what we can do. Question in from Harland about how do we fund research into new nature-based solutions, for example, novel applications of nature processes if they're coming out of industrial need rather than academia. I suppose, where do they go? Who wants to take that one up? I think might have been touched on, I think, in terms of, you know, the maybe the accelerators and Zoe. A lot depends on scale. Brian, I think, from the regenerative ocean type. Anybody want to chime in there?
I mean, from my perspective, if they fit kind of the strategy from our side for Brainforest, we open up applications twice a year, and we really help startups from the very beginning, kind of, right? So if you have like a prototype and you think maybe about pilots, that's the right stage, and you can come to us and pre-seed, and we really help you to get ready for your first round. So that's the support that we provide.
Super, thank you, Thomas. Brian.
I think in the context of the question, if it was coming from industrials, then I think what you'll find is that there's quite a lot of corporate VCs that are out there that are very much looking to invest in very, very specific niches that are probably only relevant to them, but not so relevant to others. And corporate VCs tend to have a very different perspective than classic fund-based VCs. So I think what you'll find is that you might actually find a lot more alignment with corporate VCs because it's part of their existential survival to innovate in some of these spaces. So I would definitely look to that, and more corporates are having or developing VC arms.
Super, great answer. Thanks for that, Brian. A question here that came in: how can businesses that are not currently aligned with nature positive goals be effectively engaged and incentivized? That's kind of interesting in the context of Go Nature Positive that Siobhan is leading on. And then a specific question there for Thomas: to what extent does Triodos Bank aim to reach these businesses? Siobhan, can I ask you to answer that one there about businesses not currently aligned with nature positive goals in the context of Go Nature Positive?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and be brief.
Yeah.
So essentially, Go Nature Positive is an action which is trying to work across different industry sectors to support businesses in understanding their impacts, dependencies, and risks and opportunities relating to nature as a starting point for their journey towards nature positive. So I think the sectors that we're involved in are those that have the highest impact on nature: agri-food, forestry, tourism, the blue economy, and I'm sure I'm forgetting one, of course, the building and construction sector. So if there are companies in that area that are interested in becoming or entering this nature or becoming more nature positive, we'd be happy to engage with them, and I think we'll share at the end the link to that project. Over to Thomas.
Yeah, so this is one part of the answer. I think indeed the companies in sector that are really dependent on ecosystem services, I would say, already realize this, and actually quite some nice things are happening. For the others, yes, of course, you could appeal on their moral duty almost, I would say, but the reality is that it's going to be quite difficult to engage with them, at least at the speed that is required, unless we have supportive regulations. It's true that there is one part of this field that actually continues to, let's say, focus on the business sense from a financial perspective of investing in nature. And I think we have seen a couple of examples today. And it's true that they're there. But again, if we need to attract the capital that is required, you mentioned the number, Siobhan, of 700 billion, we will need and all these different sources to be applied to nature positive projects. So a lot more mobilization effort is needed.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. Listen, with 2 minutes to go, I'm going to give Kieran the last word before we wrap up.
Thanks. Yeah, I suppose it's just to add to that point. I suppose it's kind of up to all of us and everybody listening to kind of, convince businesses or whoever that the time is now. Like I think it's been said about a lot of different investments that the best time to invest in nature was probably 20 years ago. The second best time is now, and it's incumbent on all of us to, convince businesses and people of that, because we don't have time to wait.
Great. I think that's a super note to finish on. Yeah, we need action. We need investment now. Listen, my huge gratitude and grateful thanks to each and all of the panelists today for giving of their time, for sharing such really valuable information and insights. Nature Futures wouldn't have been possible without you. Thank you to Siobhan for mentoring the panel discussion there. And also want to pay a very special thanks to Niranjana Bindu, or Nina as we know her, for really pulling Nature Futures together. She was the power behind the machine here that got this event over the line and delivered to you today. Our very last Slido question: what would you like to see in Nature Futures 2026? What would you like to have covered? Was there things we didn't get covered today that you might like to see? Are there any specific topic areas that you'd like to see emerging for businesses in the nature positive space? So we're planning already for Nature Futures 2026, and your views are always important to us for that. So while you're typing there, I'm just going to wrap up to say again, thank you so much. We will have the recording. We will have our key takeaways, and I think there are quite a number of key takeaways from today's discussions, and the links to all of the other sort of resources and presentations that came up circulated next week. I want to thank also our two projects that supported Nature Futures, which are Invest for Nature and Go Nature Positive. Without their support, again, events like these wouldn't be possible. And to thank you all, each and every one of you, for taking the time out to come and listen and contribute to the discussions today. So to keep the conversation going, the very last slide, you can see the QR code there will give you a link to each and all of the points we have here on the right-hand side. If you haven't joined the Connecting Nature Enterprise platform, please do join us and feature your nature-based enterprises. We're building a bank of case studies of people that are doing things well and can serve as inspiration to other enterprises. So do get in touch with us if you'd like to feature your enterprise. Sign up and engage with Go Nature Positive and our pilot activities in the 5 thematic areas there that Siobhan mentioned and are on the screen. And finally, to register for Invest for Nature's Pitch and Match event coming up at the end of the month on blue carbon financing. So you'll find the links to all of that there. So listen, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to all of you. And hopefully we'll see you at Nature Futures 26. Have a great afternoon.